Social justice. We are equally entitled to our human rights without discrimination. All individuals have rights, but not all are able to exercise their rights at the same time. The very nature of society wherein there are hundreds, in the case of small communities like barangays or villages, or even millions in the case of the Philippines as a country, that limits the exercise of our rights. So social justice and human rights have a shared goal: human dignity equally for all. The issues that make social justice difficult to achieve, such as poverty, exclusion, and discrimination, are in direct contradiction with human rights, which apply to all individuals indiscriminately. Not everyone, for example, can be accommodated in an MRT coach or jeepney because there is limited space. Similarly, we all have the right to enjoy the benefits of waterways, rivers, and lakes. However, we cannot fish or swim in a small river all at the same time. This idea can be explained using the concept of social justice. So, in addition to this, historically and in theory, the idea of social justice is that all people should have equal access to wealth, health, well-being, justice, privileges, and opportunity regardless of their legal, political, economic, or other circumstances. So therefore, social justice is the view that everyone deserves equal economic, political, and social rights and opportunities. Former President and Chief Justice Jose P. Laurel defined social justice as the humanization of laws and the equalization of social and economic forces by the state so that justice may at least be approximated. Like most countries, the Philippines has laid down a complex system of laws and policies ensuring the protection of individual rights, as well as balancing and finding an equitable solution to the often conflicting exercise of individual rights. So, this explains that in social justice, it also promotes fairness and equity across many aspects of our society. For example, it promotes equal economic, educational, and workplace opportunities. And it also important to the safety and security of individuals and communities. The Greek philosopher Plato stated that justice is the harmonization of function. Each individual brings harmony to society. Thus, justice is attained in a more modern context. On the other hand, according to John Locke, an English philosopher, he noted that justice is consequential in pursuit of our wants and needs. Our individual action results to favorable or unfavorable outcomes. So in addition to this, in Plato's idea about social justice is being linked as a balance of reason, spirit, and appetite, meaning that Plato suggests that justice is not mere strength, but it is a harmonious strength. On the other hand, John Locke claimed that justice or rightness is based either upon personal interest or upon utility. The rightness of an action does not depend upon its utility. On the contrary, its utility is a result of rightness. Next, as societies develop and nations emerge, more people want the same things, thus creating a social ill that needs to be addressed. Justice then evolve into contractual agreements to provide fairness and equity to everyone. The modern concept of social justice can be traced to the American philosopher and political thinker John Rawls. According to John Rawls, in terms of freedom, people are free to do whatever they want as long as it does not interfere with the freedom of others to do what they really want. In accordance to equal opportunity, if everyone has access to the same resources, privileges, and etc., then any social economic inequalities that exist cannot be blamed on the unequal access structure of society. And lastly, in accordance to the difference principle, given the first two, an unequal society is acceptable as long as the system functions to benefit the least privileged. Okay, so in addition to this, social justice is anchored heavily on the idea that justice is based on basic human rights, and each individual must have an opportunity to exercise these rights. According to Rawls, societies must guarantee the potential of each individual to basic liberties and provide a platform for individuals to actualize those potentials. It's like freedom, equal opportunity. Community engagement. So in our previous lesson, we defined community engagement as a collaborative working processes among affiliated groups or individuals. It is a vehicle for social change, mobilize resources and systems, and strengthens social relationships. Successful community engagement programs entail the achievement of four actions, known as the pillars of community engagement: information, consultation, involvement, and empowerment, aimed at a particular group of citizenry. Common among these pillars are shared perspectives that cut across the various activities of the community action. Four pillars of community engagement. So the first one, increase in the knowledge of community members about issues that are being addressed. Next, encourage communities to co-create additional knowledge or views pertaining to the issues being addressed. Next, shared application of knowledge and new knowledge to address the issues of the community. And lastly, create opportunities for improvement, communication channels, and engage the community in regular and continuous exchanges. Participatory and community engagement. However, traditional knowledge and methods such as river cleanups and planting trees and plants along the banks were not sufficient to address the issue of water pollution. Thus, the volunteers conducted further research and brainstormed in coordination with the religious group nearby Ngos town. They decided to use bokashi or rice hull bowls to introduce good microorganisms and combat bad microbes in the river. Bokashi bowls are bowls made of garden soil molasses, and rice hull. They originated in Japan, where the Japanese used them to clean fish ponds. The garden soil and rice hull mix is a good breeding ground for good bacteria, combined with molasses, which provide nutrition for cultured microorganisms. The bokashi balls are cultured for several weeks until they develop molds which help hold the balls together once they are dropped into the water. So in addition to this, bokashi is of ancient origin and is often reported as being invented in Japan. There is some debate as to when it was formally discovered or invented. It was introduced to our modern culture in 1982 by Dr. Lee. To make the bokashi balls, the group combined a mixture of clay, ceramic powder, or brown sugar or molasses, and rock salt, and then infuse the mixture with microorganisms. The mixture was formed into large balls and left to ferment for several weeks until coated with a fuzzy white fungus. Bokashi mud balls inhibit the growth of algae and break down any sludge and salt in the water, resulting in clear and healthy water. The idea to be an easy solution, but the Angat Kabataan volunteers must have thousands of bokashi balls to help clean the whole river. The handful of volunteers cannot do it alone, and partnership and engagement with the community is crucial. Aside from the creation of the balls, the planting and maintenance of plants along the banks and the regular cleanups cannot be successfully implemented by the youth volunteers alone. Angat Kabataan volunteers requested for help from their fellow youth in the barangay along the creek, barangay leaders, and community members. The process of using bokashi balls along with our regular river cleanups with the end goal of eliminating the river's murky color and foul odor was a success. The communities along the river exceeded their production target for bokashi balls. Early in 2013, thousands of bokashi balls were dropped into the water. Slowly thereafter, positive results were observed as the full odor of the creek was significantly reduced after a few months. The engagement of local leaders and community members in producing the bokashi balls and their participation in the regular cleanups are examples of the power of participatory collective action. Instead of a top-down approach where a small group of outsiders or community members would be providing the solutions to issues and problems of the community and to provide a more potent and lasting development situation. In contrast to the mainstream, top-down development, participatory development directly involves local communities In development projects, participatory development is a process through which stakeholders influence and share control over the development initiatives and over the decisions and resources that affect themselves. Mahidranima, one of the foremost thinkers on development, suggested that participatory development featured the following core characteristics: the cognitive, that generates new ways of understanding community issues and problems; next, political, it capacitates the powerless; and instrumental, it proposes alternative solutions. So, in addition to this, Mahid Ranima was a diplomat and former minister of Iran, born in Tehran. He represented Iran at the UN from 1957 to 1971. He worked on problems of poverty and production processes of poverty by the market economy. And according to him, one of the most commonly accepted definition of participatory development is as follows: participatory development seeks to give the poor a part in the initiatives and projects that are designed by outside organizations, in the hopes that these projects will be more sustainable and successful by involving local and international, as well as the whole communities. The social movement perspective and the institutional perspective further explains participatory development. So we have the first one, passive participation. So in passive participation, participation is at the minimum, wherein stakeholders are merely informed about the plans and progress of projects. The people's involvement hardly goes past the discussion stage during meetings. Next, participation by consultations, wherein stakeholders answer queries posed by external researchers or experts. The decision-making power remains in the hands of external parties who ultimately are not obliged to actually use the stakeholders' input. Next, participation by collaborations. Stakeholders with predetermined goals participate during the discussion, analysis, and decision-making stages. And lastly, empowerment participation. These are referring to stakeholders actively participate in the process and in its analysis. This features a joint decision-making process, wherein stakeholders are considered equal co-partners with the external experts. Most significantly, control and ownership of the process are in the hands of the primary stakeholders. So in addition to this, the social movement perspective works most in balance of set of political and social, economic, and cultural priorities, resulting in shared resources and shared power, thus leading to equity and social justice. Social equity, gender equality, and community engagement. As a value in community engagement, social equity pertains to the increased access or participation of marginalized classes or community sectors. Among these marginalized sectors are women, children, youth, indigenous people, persons with disabilities, or the PWDs, elderly, and the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, or what we call this the LGBT community. Mainstream participation and the pursuit of the individual entitlements often involve a ruling class or sector. In Philippine rural communities, for example, majority of barangay leaders are men. In other political positions, men are also outnumber women in leadership roles. So there is a so-called inferiority against women and also discrimination. Gender equality. Among all the protected classes, the struggle for recognition of women and as an extension other gender marginalized groups such as the LGBT community perhaps spans the longest line of protected battles, not just for the recognition of rights, but also for equal access to opportunities. Historically, women were excluded from learning institutions in every culture and society up until the 18th century. Until now, access to education is limited to some women in certain localities because of religious hindrances and traditional community values. The United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women defines gender equality as the equal rights, responsibilities, and opportunities of women and men, and girls and boys. The International Planned Parenthood Federation, on the other hand, defines it as the measurable equal representation of women and men. Gender equality does not denote that both genders are the same. Gender equality in participatory development. The objective of participatory development is to engage the marginalized in development projects for their own benefits. The more participants from a community, the higher is the expectation of success and sustainability of such projects. If almost or all the stakeholders participate, then there is likelihood of oppositions and clashing opinion about the implementation of projects and responses to community-based issues. Individuals with a certain community have distinct needs and play distinct roles. Differences in gender differ between the roles played by women and men and their unique needs and responses to certain community-based issues. For example, in a community that is prone to flooding, men would have different priority, such as livelihood and the structural integrity of their houses, whereas women would be more concerned with the health and welfare of their children. Advocacy and people empowerment. Advocacy and people empowerment are two sides of the same coin. Both are modes of community engagement, highlighting the collaborative nature of various groups and individuals working together. Both advocacy and people empowerment are initially seen as external influenced, aiming to achieve a more enabled community who can advocate for itself in the long run. Looking at the previous case, Gabriela as a women's group has long been engaged in advocating for women's rights. At the same time, it also engaged in community organizing and women's empowerment, seminars, and the establishment of local chapters. Its legislative agenda in the House of Representatives and its national movement to advance women's rights is a form of advocacy, whereas organizing local chapters, which include reproductive health seminars, violence against women and children, talks and livelihoods trainings, is a form of people's empowerment. People empowerment. People empowerment refers to the processes that increase community autonomy and individual self-determination. These processes are designed to help people gain control of their own lives and enable them to effectively respond to issues confronting their communities using their own authorities and with minimal external support. People empowerment often refer to already capacitated groups whose members want to take a more active role in advancing their communities. The Global Youth Justice noted that specific strategies are needed to further capacitate individuals. Examples of these strategies are the elimination of negative values and the reintroduction of norms that would combat the already existing negative values in a community. Advocacy. Advocacy refers to enabling marginalized groups and promoting their individual rights. It is a process of supporting people and communities via access to information and services and advancing or promoting their rights in a larger or more institutionalized sphere. Advocacy as a model of community engagement can also be a means of attaining people empowerment. Advocacy can be led by those outside a particular community or sector or by organic leaders within the community. The most effective has always been a combination or partnership of both the community or sectoral leaders and NGO workers and activists. So in addition to this, advocates have played an integral role in getting politicians to understand public health issues and getting lawmakers motivated to act, to amplify message and build greater public support. This will lead to educating the public about the important role of some issues like public health issues in improving the whole lives of the community. Community advocacy helps people feel more enabled to take control of their own lives and provides practical support to overcome health and social care issues and other concerns within the community. This approach equips people with the knowledge and skills and empower their own best to advocate. NGOs in particular are usually burdened with the following concerns. So we have the first one, the financial support. NGOs are dependent on both public and private funding donors, local and international, to carry out their respective advocacies. They have to ensure adequate funds for their staff and core activities like education and information dissemination campaigns. Lack of financial support hamper the efficiency of an NGO in advancing its advocacy. So in addition to this, most of the NGOs solely survive on its funds, well-organized financial resources help in strengthening fundraising efforts by giving an overall idea about how the available finance and the amount of finance that needs to be accumulated. So the present financial conditions of any organization determines its future. In a similar manner, NGOs should also opt for sustainable use of finance. This simply means that NGOs should spend in their present ventures, keeping in mind the future. After all, it is quite important to have future plans and become well secured as well as future ready. Next, carrying out campaigns. NGOs use publicity to generate public awareness amid stiff competition for media coverage and public relations. Credibility. NGOs' opponents resort to black propaganda by labeling and lumping progressive NGOs as leftist or communities, demonizing them with all the negative association conjured in the public mind by such labels. Harassment by state and non-state actors. NGO workers advocating human labor and indigenous peoples' rights, especially in troubled communities and areas, are harassed by both state and non-state actors to protect political and economic interests. Ensure the sustainability of NGOs. For an NGO to continuously advocate people's empowerment, it has to give surviving by maintaining a sufficient and consistent financial support from reliable donors among other legitimate sources. Campaigning for their advocacies. Use various platforms to spread advocacy information, such as leaflets, posters, radio and TV ads, and interviews, and create social media accounts and online pages. Lobby for pertinent legislation, government policies, and implementation of existing laws. The Anti-Disappearance Act, a law safeguarding people from enforced disappearance and further protecting community workers and advocates, was signed into law mainly through the initiatives and patient lobbying of human rights NGOs, such as the families of victims of involuntary disappearance.